Hello everyone and welcome to the fifth episode of PeopleSoft Interview series. This is your host for today. My name is Pravin Ranalkar and in today's episode we will be discussing interview questions about PeopleCode. So as always, our format will be we will discuss the question, we will discuss their answers, we will also discuss the follow-up questions and then we will go through quick tutorials to understand the concepts. For today, we will be discussing 19 interview questions made up of the main question as well as their follow-up questions. Alright, so with that agenda in mind for today, let's start the discussion. So let's start with the very fundamental question, and the first question we have is what is PeopleCode and why do we need it? So PeopleCode is a proprietary language for PeopleSoft systems. So proprietary means it is created by PeopleSoft systems and for PeopleSoft system. So PeopleCode allows us to create the business logic as per our requirement, and it helps a lot in creating customizations in addition to the delivered applications. So let me give you a quick example of how PeopleCode can help us. So we have this employee salary page which stores the salary information of an employee. We have three components such as basic salary, HRA and special allowance, and these three components contributes to the total salary of an employee. We also have variable which will be in percent, and the variable amount will be the percentage calculated upon the total salary. For example, if I say the variable to be 10% and if I save it, then I will have the variable amount as 10% of the total salary. Now, PeopleSoft system provides some inbuilt data validations. For example, this is a number field for variable. So if I accidentally provide a float value which has a decimal point, then the system will not allow me. Or if I accidentally provide an alpha character here, then also system will not allow me. So these are called as system edits. That means validations provided by the system. But if I need my own custom logic, for example, the variable percentage cannot be less than 1% and the variable percentage cannot be greater than 10%. So it should strictly be between 1 to 10, and if we provide a value out of this range, then the system should give me an error message. So if I do it right now, if I say the variable is 15%, then the system is allowing me. So system cannot control such kind of validations, and we can implement these validations using PeopleCode. So to solve this problem, I went to employee table. I went to the field called as variable percentage, and in the field edit event, I provided this validation logic. So let me save it and let me rerun the employee page. So now if I provide any valid value, let's say 7%, and if I save it, the system will allow me to save it since it is a valid value. But if I go out of this range, for example, I say the variable is 12%, and if I try to save it, the system will give me the error message as expected. So this is one example where we can use PeopleCode for data validations, and in real world applications, there are multiple places where we need such kind of validations for which PeopleCode is extremely helpful. So using PeopleCode, we can do literally anything inside PeopleSoft applications. In addition to data validation, we can control and manipulate the data. We can interact with the database system. We can retrieve the data from the database. We can insert the data into database. We can update the existing data into database. We can read file. We can write file. We can transfer from one page to another page. We can send emails. We can send messages, etc. So there are multiple things which we can do using PeopleCode. Hence, PeopleCode is a good skill to have, especially if you are working as a PeopleSoft technical consultant. A follow-up question is, where does PeopleCode run inside the PeopleSoft applications? So this question is with respect to the PeopleSoft's pure internet architecture. So if we refer the people books for PeopleSoft pure internet architecture, then we can see these are the fundamental components of the architecture. So we have a relational database management system, we have an application server, we have batch server, web server, and web browser. So when it comes to running the people code, then application server is the area where people code is executed. We can refer more about this in the people books, and if we scroll down to application server, we can see it runs the business logic and submit SQLs to the database server. Here, business logic is similar to people code, similar to how we return the data validation for employee variable. So another follow-up question is, what are the different areas where you can write people code? So if we talk about the PeopleSoft online pages or the custom applications, then we have multiple areas where we can write people code. So we can write people code at record field level, at record level, at component level, also component record field level. We can also write a people code for pages. So we have the page activity event, and we can write people code for PeopleSoft pages. We can also write people code for menus. So we have multiple menus using which we do the navigation, and we can write people code for them. If we talk about application engine program, then yes, we can also write people code in a application engine program. So we have an action type as people code, inside which we can write the people code for application engines. If we talk about the integration tools, then we can also write people code for component interfaces. So it is one of the integration tools which allows us to expose our PeopleSoft functionality to another applications. And finally, we can also write people code inside application packages. So using application packages, we can write a fully functional piece of business unit. We can also write in an object-oriented programming. And once we have that function or that package ready, whenever we need this functionality, we can call that application package in order to use the people code. So these are the different areas where you can write people code. Another follow-up question is, where is people code stored in a PeopleSoft system? So we discussed that we usually associate a people code with some PeopleSoft definition. It can be a component, record, the record field, menu, etc. So when it comes to storing people code, we have some people tools table which stores the information about people code. So let's see some example of such people tools table. So we have this first table called as PSPCMPROG. So if we query this table, then we get such data. In this table, the key fields are object value 1, object value 2, and object value 3, which will help you identify exactly where the people code has been written. For example, if you see the object value 2 is GBL, so this looks like a component, and for this component on a post build event, some people code has been written. So if we scroll down, we have few more options such as when was the people code created and by whom it was created. However, in this record, we cannot see the actual people code since this is encrypted. So let's move to another record, which is PSPCM name. And if we query this table, then again we have some useful information with respect to people code. So you can query this table to get the required information. So what if we want to see the actual people code which was written? So yes, we have another table which is the PSPCMTXT, which will give you the actual people code which was written. So if we query this record, then we have multiple information. We have these identifier fields similar to how we saw earlier. And if we scroll to the right, we have this field called as PC text, which contains the actual people code which was written. For example, remember few minutes back we discussed about writing people code for this variable validation. So let's query this PSPCMTXT record with object value as PC underscore EMP underscore salary. This is nothing but the record for which we have written the people code. So let's query this table and you can see object value 1 is the record name. Object value 2 is the field name because we have written the people code at record field level. We also have the object value 3 which will tell you for which event we have written the people code. Since we have written the people code for field edit of this field, we have the entry here, and if we scroll to the right, we have the field called as PC text, and this is the field which will contain the actual people code. So let me copy this field, and if I paste the value here, you can see this is the actual people code that we have written for our validation. So this is how the PeopleSoft system stores the people code. The next question we have is about variables in PeopleCode. And the question is, how do you declare a variable in PeopleCode? So let's say we want to declare a variable called my name, which will be a string variable, and it should store my name. In that case, first thing we can do is we can mention the scope of the variable. So we have multiple scopes available, which indicates the lifespan of a variable. Next, we can indicate the data type of the variable. In our case, we need a string, so we will go with string. And the third thing is we need to provide a variable name. So since we are creating this variable, this will be called as user defined variables. And for user defined variables, we need to provide the sign ampersand and then variable name. So let's call it as my name. So this is how you can declare a variable in PeopleCode. So let me provide some value to this variable and test if this is working fine. So let me save these changes and let me test this code on our salary page. So if I make any changes and if I try to save it, I'm getting the win message from our PeopleCode as expected. A follow-up question is, what are the different variable data types that are supported in PeopleCode? So we just discussed about a string variable, but PeopleCode supports wide different varieties of data types. So let's refer PeopleBooks to get the information about the different data types. So as per PeopleBooks, we have two major categories of data types which are available in PeopleCode. So these are conventional data types and object data types. So in conventional data types, you will find all the foundational data types which have been using for a long time, and these are available in most of the programming languages. So we have any boolean, date, datetime, float, integer, string, time, etc. These are the conventional data types. We can also use array of integers, array of strings, array of any data type, etc. So you can read this page for more information. And the second type of data type is called as object data types. So these are special because these are not available in every programming language. For example, we have these component buffer data types such as fields, records, rows, and row set. These are specific to PeopleSoft, and by using this data type, we can create online pages and we can manipulate a lot of data specifically in component buffer. So PeopleCode also supports some built-in data types to create charts. So as you can see, we have these many different types of charts, data types which are available. Now, if you are writing PeopleCode for internet handling or, working with some external systems with the help of internet, then we can have cookies, request and response data types. Similarly, it supports XML doc, file data type, message, charts, array, etc. So these are the various data types which are supported in PeopleCode. A follow-up question is, what are the different variable scopes which are available in PeopleCode? So as per PeopleBooks, we have these three variable scopes available. So these are global scope, component scope, and local scope. So global scope means the variable will be available for the entire session. For example, if we log in into PeopleSoft system, then we are starting a PeopleSoft session. And now if we declare a variable as global, then from as soon as the session start, the variable will be accessible and available across all the system in PeopleSoft. So global is the biggest scope for a variable, and it is not only available through page people code or component people code, but it is also accessible through application engine people code program. So if we want to use a variable as global variable, we need to declare that variable at the top of the programs. And if we are using a global variable in multiple program, let's say we are using a global variable in 5 different program, then we need to declare that global variable in all of that 5 programs at the top so that we can use that global variable into that particular program. So the next scope we have is the component scope, and this is a shorter scope compared to global scope. So component scope means the variable will be accessible and available only for a particular component. So let's say we are trying to enter into a component, and now for this component, if we have declared a variable as having a component scope, then the variable will be accessible as long as we are operating into this component. So the benefit of component scope is, even though we are navigating from one page to another page in that component, the variable is still accessible since it is a component scope variable. And the last scope we have is local scope, which is even a shorter scope compared to component scope. So local variables are only available throughout a particular program. Let's say we have written some program at a record field level for a field change event. In that case, the local scope variable will be available only for that particular program which is present at the field change event of that record field. Also, if we have written a PeopleCode function, and in that function, if we are declaring a variable to have a local scope, in that case, the local variable will be available only during that particular function. It would not be accessible outside of that function, even though it is the same program. A follow-up question is, what is auto declaration of a variable, and what will be the scope and data type of a variable when it is declared using auto declaration? So auto declaration means when you try to use a PeopleCode variable without declaring it in the program, the system takes care of its declaration by itself. That is called as auto declaration. In that case, the system takes care of the data type of that variable and the scope of the variable. For example, let's say I take a variable called as episode, and if I say episode equals 5. Now, as you can see, I have not declared this variable. Also, I did not mention what is the data type and what is the scope of that variable. Now watch this. What will happen? If I click on this validate syntax button, I get this message here, variable episode auto declared. That means system has taken care of this variable declaration by itself. Now, coming to what will be the data type and what will be the scope of such variable. Well, the data type of this variable will be any. So any is one of the data type in PeopleCode, and it means this variable can hold any value, be it a string or a number or a float or a date or a boolean, etc. And what will be the scope of this variable? So the variable episode will have a scope of local. So that's about the auto declaration of variable in PeopleCode. Another follow-up question is, what is system variables in PeopleCode and how those are different from the user-defined variables? So we just saw an example of this variable called as episode. So as we as a user declared this variable, this is called as user-defined variable, and user-defined variable start with this ampersand sign. So for user-defined variables, we control the value, but there is other type of variable which is called as system variable. So system variables are nothing but a bunch of useful variables provided by the PeopleSoft system in which the system itself controls the value of that variable. Now, such variables are really useful because if we want to know certain information from the system, we can use these variables and access that information. For example, let's say you want to know what is the current date today and you need to use that date in a PeopleCode program. You can just say percent and you can say date. So that is one of the system variable and it will show you current date. Now, one difference, as you can see, is when we work with user-defined variables, we are using this sign ampersand. But when we work with system variables, we use this sign percentage. Okay. So there are a couple of examples. For example, if you want to know who is the currently logged in user, so you can just say percent user ID. Okay. So just a small correction. And if you also want to know currently in which component you are, you can simply say percent component. All right. So let me try these values using win message. So let me show you these three variables using a win message. So let's go to the online page and let's trigger the field edit PeopleCode event. So if we trigger the field edit PeopleCode event, we can see we got the date because of the percent date variable. Then we got the string as VP1, which is nothing but the currently logged in user ID. And we got this value because of the system variable percent user ID. And finally, we have the component name, which we got from percent component. So like this, PeopleSoft has many useful system variables which are available in PeopleCode system. And for the list of all these available system variables, you can refer this particular page. So guys, as this episode became longer than anticipated, let's take a pause here and call it part 1. We will be releasing part 2 of this episode in the next week, in which we will continue from question number 3. Alright, see you in the next week. Thank you.